you all for coming. I really appreciate you making it out today. I hope you had a great night last night. As was mentioned, my name is Jason. I'm from the Ivy Business School, which is part of Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. I'm a senior programmer there. Among other things, I'm the technical architect for our Canvas implementation. So it was up to me to figure out all the pieces that we need to put together, along with a great group of people, some of whom have graciously joined me today. Over the past 14 months, we've set up 2 instances of Canvas, one for our main student body, and we've isolated a separate one for executive education. Beyond that, we've developed 15 LTIs internally and gotten them up and deployed. We've got 2 slated as well beyond those first 15 for early September. We've done a deep integration into our student information system, leveraging the Canvas API, getting data from our system into Canvas and data back out again. And we have a team of 6 developers and 1 co-op developer who we've got fully up to speed on building LTIs and getting them deployed in our environment. I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail as we go, but first I just want to mention there are a bunch of links in the presentation, and at the end I've pulled that all together for you in one link you need to write down to find it all later. If you have any questions, feel free to ask throughout, and I will do my best to keep some time at the end as well. So who doesn't know what an LTI is? Through a show of hands. Fantastic, then I won't take any time on this slide. If you do want to do any further reading, the IMS, the Global Learning Consortium, has a great detail of the spec and how everything works. Canvas documentation also has a bunch of really great information on how to get that working and configured. So today, I've broken things up into 4 pieces for you. First, we're going to start with the mission, which is what we set out to do and why we made the choices we did. We're going to then jump into the mission details, which is how we actually pulled it off and got to where we are today. We've got some declassified intel for you, which is going to be some of the things we learned the hard way, tips and tricks, things like that you're going to want to keep an eye out for. And then we'll just pull it all together with a summary. So through a show of hands, I just want to get a bit of a feel here to find out what is it that you guys do. So out of everyone here, who would consider themselves more of a course designer? Okay, fantastic. Anybody from more of an IT support scenario where they're going to be dealing with questions from Canvas, maybe doing some training? Fantastic. What about more the administrative staff side? So that could be anybody like project managers, business analysts, managers of the people doing all the work on the chart up here. Okay. And lastly, programmers. That's what I expected. Great. Of the programmers, what kind of technology stack do you reference mostly? Are you a Microsoft shop at all? All right. Not too many in Canvas do Microsoft, so I just want to get a feel for that. What about Python? Yeah, okay. Ruby? Just some kind of straight JavaScript framework? Okay, great. Thank you very much. So with that picture together, everybody's kind of called out, here are the things you do. That is accurate 100%. That's probably what it's going to say on your business card or something very close. But at a higher level, we all actually work together to shape the experience that our students, faculty, and each other have at the school. That is really what we do. It doesn't matter what we do day to day. All of that flows in together and builds that experience. Canvas is just one of the tools that you're going to use to make that experience as great as possible. So your job, as you bring Canvas on board, and I don't know how far along you are, or maybe you haven't started yet, which is totally fine as well. Thank you for coming, is to figure out what makes your user's experience incredible. Canvas has done a great job of putting a bunch of really core features in place, and they work really well, and they're constantly improving that. The one thing that we found was that it doesn't do everything, mainly because it's not supposed to. They focus on a core piece, and then you add through the LTIs into that. So you need to really break down your user groups into the faculty, the students, the course designers, and the administrative staff. You really need to think about what they do, and you need to ask a lot of questions. If you're lucky to have some business analysts and project management people here, they can handle a lot of those interviews so that the programmers don't have to go out and do that. But it is highly important to go out and ask those questions and figure out what hurts today for them? What do they need to do that is painful to do so that you can make it easier? The other thing that you need to keep in mind, when you jump into something like Canvas, you're typically going to be moving away from something else, whether you had another LMS that you were using, whether it was proprietary or custom. This is really the opportunity that you can redefine what are the things you do. Like, how do you provide room booking access? Or how do you provide access to course registration? Or maybe something else to do with administrators. So you really need to take that opportunity to do that. Now, I mentioned off the top that we had 15 LTIs out in the wild today. This is a general hit list of what those are. They're divided very strategically into 3 buckets. The bucket on the far left are specifically student-focused things. So when you log into that Canvas experience, you see the LTI sitting there. If you're a student, it's there, and you click it, and it'll give you, for example, I'll just hit the first one here, biography. So we, at the Ivy Business School, manage the equivalent of a LinkedIn biography for all of the students. So we built an LTI that lets them go in and manage their education records and all of that kind of stuff, where they went to school, what jobs they've had. That's set up as one LTI. Down the middle, those are more focused for faculty administrators, course designers specifically. It's really stuff that's going to help the faculty in that specific course. One of the examples there is the biography book, so that while the students can edit their individual biographies and choose what they want to share with people, the biography book lets the faculty see for every student in that class, here are their biographies. The category on the far right is something that's a little more open. So depending on what your role is within Canvas, whether you're a student or a faculty member or an administrator, you see slightly different things when you go into the LTI. And through the variables that Canvas passes in, we can determine that very easily as we get things going. So I have already mentioned room booking. We have something called cohort content, which is just an interesting way of showing, for today, what is everybody else teaching? It gives you a snapshot of their course content for that day altogether, so they can build off of each other and have a real immersive learning experience. And then we've got a few others here about alumni. We have a separate isolated alumni directory, and we brought that in so they can see that. So there was those 15 LTIs. There was a ton of information we knew we needed to add into Canvas, and a ton of features we wanted them to have access to. One of the hardest questions we had was where to start. And that's really where we circled back around and said, who uses Canvas? What are those roles? And we started with the students. So what is something that students need to do every day? They need to book a breakout room, and that needs to be dirt simple to do. So it's a little hard to see on the side, but we added in the global navigation on the left, we have an icon there for room bookings. That was part of the LTI configuration. We said, yeah, drop it in there. Here's our icon, go put it there. The first thing we knew that they needed to do very quickly is book that room. So when this LTI loads, that's what's there. The grayed out areas are things that are not available. The green ones are things that are. 2 clicks and you've got a room. That's it. Anything else to do with room bookings? You can see along the top we have some things for managing, deleting bookings, looking at maps of the schools, things like that. Those are all secondary actions, so still easy to get to, but they're not in your way when you want to book a room. So that was an everyday pain. The other side of the coin is, what is something that is incredibly stressful for students, but they don't really need to do that often? And that comes back around to course registration. We took the opportunity here to make a brand new UI for the student experience inside of course registration. The administrative backend did not change at all. All we really did through the LTI was build that website so that it would be configured and give students access. So from this one screen, when course registration is open, the students can see in this particular view, they're looking to book courses for the spring semester. They can easily see, based on the color coding, the icons, there is a legend, but it scrolls below the page here, what courses are available, what courses am I waitlisted on already, what are things that I may have been withdrawn from, what can I do, essentially. Along the far right-hand side, we also have a tally for them. For every semester, they get a certain number of points they can spend to bid on these courses, so all of that's tracked right there. They can easily see everything. As well, which isn't shown here, there's a summary tab which is just a much simpler view to say, for every semester you're here, here's what you're registered in, here's what you withdrew from, here are the things you're waitlisted on, in one quick snapshot. As well to note, these are all fully responsive, so as soon as you squish this down, everything kind of rearranges to fit. This is one of the more harder ones we had to do that with. So that kind of covers the student side of things at a broad scope. To touch on the faculty side a little bit, I want to pause briefly to mention that the Ivy Business School uses case-based learning. So what that inevitably means is the classroom time, each session is set up for a discussion. The students are expected to go get the course content, they'll read through the 2 or 3 cases for that day, come prepared to talk about it. So we needed a very easy ability to allow the professor to say, I know this is the order that I wanted all these cases to appear in, but I actually want to take the cases from 2 weeks from now and teach them on Friday. So we needed a quick way to swap that content around, so that was one of the tools we put into the Course Tools LTI. As well, we had a very simple way to export a class list into Excel, which is something that they needed. And as well, there was a copy page content. A lot of these things are going to sound like default Canvas features. Some of them are. Some of them have been vastly improved that you've heard this week, so today. But when we first started out, it was a little more cumbersome, so we built these as a stopgap, knowing that down the road Canvas was going to make this better. Alrighty. So how did we do it? When we first got access and knew Canvas was what we wanted to use, we started digging around, and like any developer, okay, it's a third-party website, we don't host it, we can't really see what's happening on the server live. What do? We noticed that you can have a theme within Canvas, and you can have a series of themes, but the theme you have on, you can import a custom style sheet and a custom set of JavaScript. That immediately was our first best guess. We're like, well, let's go in there. Let's add a bunch of JavaScript. We'll hack some stuff. We'll add some buttons. We'll replace some content over here. And we actually got pretty successful at it. You could do quite a bit. But all of that happened over top of Canvas. So that what happens here is Canvas will render the web page. And then all of that JavaScript you put in to add buttons or draw your content over top of something else, that flickers in after the page loads. And it will always flicker. There's no way to get the internet fast enough that that won't happen. So at that point, we took a step back and decided, how can we actually get these integrations inside? And that's when we first started digging into LTIs and figuring out this was the right approach for us. So as I mentioned, we are a Microsoft shop specifically. So we just built ASP.NET MVC websites and then hosted them ourselves on our own web servers, set them up in Canvas as LTIs using the config files. Again, Canvas has a lot of really great documentation on exactly how to do that, how to build your config files, so you can say, I want the button to show in the left nav menu, or I want it to show within the course menu. Tons of options there. I highly recommend you check that out. But yeah, so that's how we started that process. So we built a couple of websites pretty much from scratch and just see what we could do. The other thing you might notice is that our LTIs look remarkably like the Canvas theme we have. That is not by accident, and in fact, I can tell you they use the exact same jQuery and jQuery UI libraries that Canvas directly uses. And to pull that off, we had to do 2 things. The first was to actually go into GitHub, where you can find all of the Canvas source code, and just read some of it. Figure out how are they building the style sheets. They use CSS less, by the way, so you'll need to be able to understand that to figure out how they generate all the CSS. And the same way, how do they get all that JavaScript? They have hundreds of files in there, and they're all based in CoffeeScript. But how do they generate that down and actually have it so that you can see all of that render? So that was the first side of things. The second was to actually just open up Chrome, turn on the developer tools, and load Canvas. Once you see all the requests, you can see all the rendered CSS files that are there, all the rendered JavaScript files, and I just saved them to my desktop. And then I saved the web page to my desktop. And then I turned off the internet, and I started editing that web page to point to the files I downloaded instead of the files that Amazon was hosting for Canvas. And as I fixed any of the small cross-references, it took me about an hour. And at that point, I had a web page that I could make do anything that had the exact same theme, use the exact same jQuery controls, behave the exact same way. So that was the process we undertook for that. I will put a small word of caution. You've now isolated this style from your Canvas theme completely. They are two separate things. So we hosted those CSS files and JavaScript files on our own web server for our own LTIs to use. If you change your theme, the LTIs don't change automatically. You have to ripple those through. For the most part, though, it's relatively stable, and because it's isolated, it gives us a development path to actually clean that stuff up. So that's all well and good, but how do we actually get the developers to know what style classes to use? How do we get them to know what JavaScript functions to use to make their LTIs behave the way that Canvas does? For free, with Canvas, you get a style guide for every installation that is personally branded to the theme you have active straight out of the box. The URL's right there. You just type in your Canvas domain /style guide, and that just comes up. For everything you can see up there, and I've specifically called it the accordion here, but it tells you not only what does the HTML markup look like, what are the CSS classes you need to put on there, as well as what it's actually going to look like rendered on the screen. So you can play around with that and see how that behaves responsively. That was meant for course designers to make the pages within the courses match the look and feel of Canvas. But now, because we pulled all of this style and JavaScript out, it was a tool for our developers to do the exact same thing. So everything flowed together very easily from that point. I want to move on now to what I've dubbed the LTI portability problem. Canvas has an amazing website, as I've mentioned already. It has a lot of really rich and robust features. They have a really great suite of mobile apps, even more now with the teacher app that just came out yesterday. They are currently working very hard to keep all of that really beautifully simple and very functional. The problem is, though, when you put your LTI setup into the Canvas website, you're never going to see it in the mobile app. So when we put room bookings on the website, if the students open up the Canvas app, they can't see room bookings. So what do you do with that? And there's really two options. The first one is you can just create your own mobile app that acts as a container for your own LTIs. That isn't necessarily as hard as it may sound. Essentially, all you need to do is build a bucket that acts the same way Canvas does. And again, all of that source code is available on GitHub for you to see how they do it. So that you know when you click that room bookings button, you have to post all of these variables with these values, things like the course ID for Canvas, or the user ID, the URL for the user's profile picture, all those things, and you can use developer tools in Chrome as well to see what all those are and how they're structured. So you just make a website, essentially, that encapsulates all of that functionality, and you can call out to LTIs in the exact same way that Canvas calls out to your LTIs. The other option you have is, instead of making it more of a companion app that really just houses your LTIs, you can go whole hog and say, well, we're not going to actually use the Canvas apps directly. We're going to make our own app that not only pulls in our LTIs, but it pulls in some of the experiences that the Canvas mobile apps do. That is a much bigger undertaking. It is definitely a way you could go. We are leaning to the first method, and for the Microsoft people in the room, we are looking at Xamarin Forms to tackle that, simply because it lets us build it once and deploy out to Android, iOS, and the Windows platform. So you have the two options there to go, and it really is about what kind of experience you want to have for those user groups to see what they can do. So moving on to some declassified intel. The first thing I wanted to lay out is we've got 3 things up on the slide right now. There is a series that is specifically about .NET development for LTIs by Garth Egbert. It's actually a really good read, even if you don't do .NET development. It's a very good, straightforward path to get you from, oh, this is what an LTI is, to here's your first Hello World example. So I strongly recommend you check that out. As well, if you're in the NuGet environment, Andy Miller has a lot of really good .NET packages there. Some are for the API wrappers directly, some are for making ASP.NET websites a little bit easier to interact with Canvas. And the last one I wanted to call out, which I believe they actually spoke yesterday on it, is the University of Florida has a Python wrapper, which if you want to understand how to build a wrapper for an API, it's probably one of the simplest ones to read, even if you don't know Python. It's very clean. It tells you how the token exchanges happen, as well as access to how do I get a list of courses. So if you're just looking for something to read to figure out how to build your own wrapper, I would highly recommend you take a look at that, unless you're in Python, and I would just say use it, because it's free to use. It's all open source. I know I've called out 3 specific examples here, but the point here is there's 3 areas you need to check out. The Canvas community has a very strong user following. People are very passionate about this product, and they are more than happy to answer any questions you can come up with. So definitely check that out. The NuGet setup also has a bunch of packages, not just by Andy Miller, for a wide variety of languages that you might need. And the last one is GitHub. There's also not just Canvas and not just this Python wrapper, but if you just type Canvas LMS into GitHub, you're going to see 3 or 4 pages of results of things you can dig through. So the next chunk of declassified intel I want to share is something that kind of bit us about 7 weeks ago. Who here doesn't know how third-party cookie blocking works? And I would not blame you if you don't. I'm unfortunately going to have to break that for you because I have to explain that now. Canvas, when you type canvaslms.com in your browser, or whatever your domain is, and you go to that website, you log in, your website treats that as a first-party website because you typed it in, you said you wanted to go there. The way the LTIs work, though, is you tell Canvas, hey, I just want to open up room bookings. Canvas then says, well, I know we don't host that. I know it's on Ivy's web servers. So I'm going to go to Ivy's web servers and get that information and show it in the screen. That's where the third-party connection comes in. That's also kind of a bad thing on the internet for some people because you can do some very nefarious things with that. So out of the box now, 7 weeks ago, Safari blocks third-party cookies by default. It's one of the options in there. You can get them in, if you can work with your users to actually say, well, just allow third-party cookies for the Canvas site and for your own web servers, then you're good to go. Nothing will be wrong. If you can't do that, though, what ends up happening is Canvas passes information into your LTI through a post. As soon as you go to do something inside of your LTI to reload the page, those post variables are gone. So it no longer knows who the user is, what roles they might have, or am I allowed to be showing as an LTI right now? So depending on how you've got it set up, it'll probably just show you a white screen. Definitely not a desirable thing. So there are a few options you have aside from working with your users. One is you can actually set up your LTI so that it doesn't require a session cookie. There's a ton of articles out there about how this works. So I'm going to list a couple here, but I'm not going to go into too much more detail. The other option you have is to set up your LTI with a cookieless session. This can get a bit tricky, especially in the .NET world. It is much easier to do in Python, but it is very tricky in .NET. The article specifically listed here walks you through how they did it. A word of caution in the .NET world, if you do that though, what we found to get it to authorize correctly, it ends up reposting. So if I click to save that room booking, it actually posted it 2 or 3 times. So the behavior we were seeing is the first save happened and the user got the room. However, the second one failed because it said the room wasn't available anymore. So that's very simple, something to be very mindful of in that regard. So at this point, I just want to pull it together and talk about the road so far. We've got a timeline there that starts May of last year and it goes to today. Everything above the bar are kind of the major milestones. So we started out looking at the LTI, or making an API wrapper rather, and we did our first level sys integration so that we could get all of our course schedules and things like that out of our sys and into Canvas set up automatically. Everything along the bottom are the LTIs we did and when we released them. They're just numbered here for simplicity. But you can see we started, like I had mentioned, with that first sys integration. After about 2 months, we started looking at the JavaScript injection into the Canvas theme that I talked about. And at that time, we started playing around with building a couple of LTIs. At the next point, you can see we got to the project template, which allowed us, after you start a brand new project in Visual Studio, we made a NuGet package that just customized that website. So it added in our default LTI configuration files, it gave a standard icon, it set up the controllers in a way that would behave correctly for the LTI right out of the box. So when we're asked, we need a new LTI, it takes about 5 minutes to actually turn it on and get a hello world with all the variables passed through. So you can see at that point, we got, right around the time we got the template working, we got LTIs 3, 4, and 5. By October, we had 7. And then by Christmas, which is when we started the next sys integration to deal specifically with the user accounts, we were at 9. And then it was just in early January we did the style thing I talked about, where we grabbed a style and wanted to have a shared style across all of our LTIs. And then we went through, and as of now, we're up to 15. To circle back a bit to what Josh was talking about on Tuesday about paths to success, the straight line here is very, very deceiving. As you can see, as we got the project template online, which is about the middle of that chart, we had to go back and apply that to the LTIs we already did. The same with the shared style, which was much closer to the end. Once we knew the shared style was up and running and working properly, we had to go back to the 9 LTIs we already built and then fold that back in. So it wasn't just like we built one LTI and washed our hands and never touched it again. There's a constant iteration over this stuff that you need to be mindful of, but it pays off. It saves a ton of time and allows you to get ramped up very, very quickly. So just to do a bit of summary here, the first point I want to make sure everybody walks away from, and this is probably the most important one, you need to leverage Canvas to build the best user experience for each user group. Again, that's students, faculty, course designers, and administration staff, that you can. Take the opportunity to actually rethink those workflows and how these people do what they need to do. The second thing you need to make sure you do is have a plan for your mobile and tablet support before you start. Figure out, do you want to build that companion app, or do you need to do something a little more involved that maybe takes away from some of the Canvas apps directly? You want to be able to create an LTI development and deployment workflow, so that's that project template I mentioned, as well. We have a build server that we set up so that as long as the LTI has been installed into Canvas previously, it's one button to redeploy it to test or to beta or to live in that setup. You want to be able to handle third-party browser cookies and make sure you have a strong working solution for that. And then take that solution and put it in your project template so you don't have to think about it again. You want to avoid leveraging JavaScript to be injected directly in the theme to add stuff to Canvas as much as possible. For some things it may be necessary and unavoidable, but like I mentioned, you're going to get that flickering effect, and you need to be very mindful of what the users are going to see with that. The last thing I want to mention is you need to stay on top of the Canvas releases. They come out every 3 weeks. A really good example from a few weeks ago, they redid the UI for the global navigation buttons down the left-hand side. The icons already look great, but they actually just went through and changed the width of those lines on the icons by about half. So the icons we put in the menu now look bulky and chunky and really out of place. So by using the beta environment to see what changes are coming up, reading the release notes as they come out, it's really going to help you keep ahead, and then it's just a minor thing to stay in line. That's really the key here. You want to stay in line with what Canvas does. As they mentioned in the keynote, they had 17 releases last year, so you need to have at least somebody looking at those notes. Yes, you've got a question back there.
Yeah, for the course registration LTI activity, does it right back to the student information system with the phone registration?
Yeah, great question. So it was about the course registration LTI and whether it wrote back to the student information system. It actually is the student information system with a new screen on top of it. So yeah, it writes directly to those tables in our database, and it pulls the data out of those tables to show.
So what are you using
Yeah, so the question was, what do we use for our student information system? Right now, we have a custom one that was built about 20 years ago, I think. So we're in the process of revamping that, but this was the first step that Canvas allowed us to do, was to actually rebuild the student experience for that student information system. Great. Are there any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned that you mentioned that.
I can just repeat the question. Go on.
You mentioned that you pulled out the CSS and created your own styles. I was just wondering why you wouldn't just continue to link to Canvas hosting.
That's actually a really great question. It was about the styles and JavaScript we pulled out. Why did we choose to host it locally? The short answer is because it's in Amazon and the file names can change randomly. So it may work this week, but then it'll be gone next week because if they refresh it, it's just not there with the same name.
Okay, and then you can't just inherit it from the page, like when LTIs embedded in the page, does it just inherit?
Right. Another great question was about inheriting the styles from a page, which is a standard practice. Unfortunately, though, the LTIs are set in an iframe, which means all the styles kind of stop and don't go inside that iframe. It stays completely isolated. Right here? Right, the question was around a maintenance strategy for all this. And yeah, so we do our best to stay on top of the releases, both from like a project analyst side of things as well as developer. That usually catches quite a bit. As well, because we're continually developing Canvas so much, we're in there all the time. Unfortunately, we don't have a QA department, so it really falls on the developers and the analysts to make sure that that gets tested. Sorry, you? Sure, yeah. So the question was about how did we decide to build the LTIs we did build, whether that was an internal decision or was it from the wider audience and user group. It's a little bit of a combination of both. The analyst at the time vetted all of the functionality within our current system that was hosting as an LMS as a starting point. There were a ton of interviews with the faculty to find out more, as well as conversations with the help desk directly to figure out where are the pain points happening. And then at that point, that gave us a start. Said, we're going to start from here. We're now a little over a year in. We're open to other things if they make sense. It's just a matter of getting that base there and then building off of that. And feedback from anyone is always valuable. Anyone else? Oh, sorry, right there.
How large is your team?
We have 4 analysts and 6 developers. Only 2 of the analysts worked on this project. And the other thing to note, of those 6 developers, only 3 of them really at a time had any opportunity to work on this because we had other projects as well on top of this. Oh, right there. Sorry?
You're hosting it in an iframe. Can you just reset your session for that domain?
The question was around, because it's hosted with the LTI is hosted with an iframe, can't you just reset your session domain? The problem is when you do that, Canvas now loses its session domain, and if you do anything outside of that iframe, it isn't going to work. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario at that point. Sorry, you had a question over here as well?
Yeah. Have you seen Atomic John's LTI starter app?
I have actually seen a little bit. I saw it last year. Sorry, the question was about seeing Atomic Gel's starter app. It's a great way to get your feet wet, for sure, and figure out exactly how you want to do what it is you want to do. So yeah, if you haven't seen that, I would definitely recommend checking that out as well. And you might have already caught that already, but the link that you're all looking for is at the bottom of the screen there. Sorry, at the back.
Have you extended any of your LTIs into the WYSIWYG editors?
We actually haven't done any WYSIWYG editors for LTIs yet. I know it's definitely something coming down the pipe for some things we might want to add. We do have, for example, Media Site, which has their own LTI, which we put in, which it adds stuff into the editor. I believe that's the only one, though, at this point. So, oh, sorry, over here, and then I'll get to you.
Did you build the group decision product, or are you
Yeah, the question was around if we built the room scheduling product, and that again is another custom. It's a hybrid between an older legacy product and something custom we built to kind of sit on top of that. Yeah, and right here. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. How are we detecting the JavaScript? Oh, injecting the JavaScript. So in the Canvas theme, if you go into the settings menu and you go into the settings and there's a themes menu. From there, if you go to edit your theme, there's a setting there where you pick like default font and color, but across the top, there's another button. If you click that, it gives you 2 file uploads. One is for CSS and one is for JavaScript. So you take your file right off your desktop and it actually embeds it, and Canvas will host that file for you. So you don't have to host it externally. All right, 2 over here. That's a very good point. Yeah, so it was just a further comment to avoiding JavaScript injection for the theme. There's some of the settings in the browser, if they get turned on, will actually block that out so that your JavaScript won't actually run. Sorry, there was another question over here, and I'll get to you.
I'm not going to use that. So, are there things you still inject custom JavaScript for? Because it fits well, or because there's just no other option?
We actually do have a few small things that we do inject for. For example, we build out a set of pages within each course that represents the material getting taught on that day that I had mentioned earlier with the moving tool for the faculty. Because pages don't have IDs in Canvas for whatever reason, we manually set that title so that if we need to go back and change that, or when we want to move things around, we can reliably predict that they didn't change that title. So we injected some JavaScript, so when you're editing a page that is one of our session pages, it actually disables that control. So there's no flicker there, but that is one of the things we do. Great. How much time do we have left, sorry? 2 minutes? Okay, back there, and then I can be available for other questions afterwards. Right, so the question was how did we address mobile with the LTIs, specifically with the theme, the JavaScript themes and things like that. There's 2 approaches the 2 approaches I talked to there. When we built each LTI out of the box, we automatically ensured that it was responsive. So that even though Canvas blocks its screen, I think it doesn't go any smaller than 500 pixels, and then it triggers a scroll bar. But when we built our LTIs in the test harness, they go right down to 200 pixels usually. The style still matches the Canvas theme, which on mobile can be a little bit of a problem because it may not be as immersive a phone experience as the users are expecting, but it's the identical experience to the desktop version. So the idea for our first phase is just that. We make sure the LTIs are responsive and nice and work nice with things on a phone. And then when we build our wrapper around that, however that needs to look, they'll behave the right way. We can then move further to say, do we need to actually build a mobile version of this style that's going to make things behave a little more like they expect. One more over here.
You talked about data test environments and how they relate to Canvas's data test environments.
Sure. So the question was about talking about our internal test environments versus what Canvas provides. And the short answer is they're relatively identical. We have a stage, a test, and a live web server. We host them in the exact same kind of way so that the test Canvas environment only looks at the test LTIs, the beta Canvas only looks at the beta LTIs and live to live. We actually built a little syncer tool that's just a directory reader because the problem is when Canvas refreshes every 3 weeks, all your LTIs that were set up on live are now set up on beta and on test. Any specific test ones are uninstalled as to how that works. So we just built a tool that after Canvas refreshes the next morning, it goes in and it just dumps all the LTIs we know we wrote. It's just a directory reader for our test server. We go through all of them, pull the config files, and through the API, the external tools API, we just add them back in. Great. All right, so as I said, I'm available for more questions offline, but thank you very much for your time and thank you for attending.